The morning of Easter Monday brought a silence that quickly turned into a tidal wave of emotion as news spread from the heart of Vatican City that Pope Francis had passed away at the age of 88. Just a day earlier, the world had seen him alive, fragile, yes, but present, at the Easter Sunday celebrations in St. Peter's Square. With countless believers looking on, he had offered his blessings and greeted the faithful with a warmth that belied his weakening frame. Yet, in the span of a single night, the Catholic Church lost its shepherd. It was Cardinal Farrell who solemnly conveyed the message that the Holy Father had returned to his eternal home, to the presence of the Heavenly Father he had served with such devotion. In the hours that followed, millions began to reflect not only on the Pope's sudden departure, but also on the life and legacy of a man who had forever altered the image of the papacy. Today, we take a deeper look into his final moments, the rituals that follow the death of a pope, and how Pope Francis, always one to place humility before grandeur, quietly reshaped these ancient traditions with his signature simplicity. It's still hard to fathom how quickly everything changed. Just the day before, the world witnessed him not standing, but seated in his wheelchair, waving with a gentle smile to the ocean of people who had gathered in the square to celebrate the resurrection of Christ. Though his body appeared frail and his movements slower than ever, his spirit had not waned. He was wheeled around the square with care, stopping often to touch and bless the infants brought to him by tearful parents who saw the moment as something sacred. His voice, though no longer strong enough to proclaim the Easter message himself, was echoed through the voice of an aide. That message focused not on doctrine or politics, but on a plea for humanity. He called for peace in regions torn by violence, including Gaza and Ukraine, and denounced the senseless craving for destruction that continues to scar the human story. It would be the last time the world would hear from him. Only a few hours after that poignant appearance, at precisely 7:35 in the morning on Easter Monday, the Vatican confirmed that Pope Francis had passed away peacefully. His final breath was drawn in the city he had led with mercy and courage. His health had been slowly declining, especially after a hospital stay earlier that year due to severe pneumonia affecting both lungs. The illness had taken a toll on his body, made even more severe due to a childhood surgery in Argentina during which part of his lung was removed. Still, despite these mounting health concerns, the Pope's sudden departure came as a shock to many. Eyewitness accounts from that morning describe a surreal scene. BBC reporter David Jaglani recalled how, the moment the Vatican announcement reached the public, crowds began to surge towards St. Peter's Square. Some ran in disbelief, others stood still in tears, and for many, it felt as though time had stopped. In the streets of Rome, a city that had grown used to his presence, grief was thick in the air. The man once known as Jorge Mario Bergoglio had walked a long and unpredictable path before arriving at the gates of the Vatican and eventually at the gates of heaven. Born in Buenos Aires to Italian immigrants who had escaped fascist persecution, young Jorge's early life was far removed from any vision of priesthood. He worked jobs that seemed ordinary. He served as a nightclub bouncer and spent time as a chemical technician before he felt the unmistakable tug of a higher calling that led him to the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, where he began a journey of faith and discipline that would eventually place him at the helm of one of the world's oldest institutions. When he was elected Pope in 2013, history was made. He became the first pontiff in over a millennium not to hail from Europe, the first pope from the Americas, and the very first Jesuit to sit upon the throne of St. Peter. His papacy, lasting 11 remarkable years, was marked by a radical departure from tradition, not in faith but in form. From the very beginning, he made it clear that the role of the Pope was not to be cloaked in luxury. He declined the lavish papal apartments, opting instead for a modest room in the Vatican guest house. He traveled light, lived simply, and constantly reminded the world that leadership in the church was about service, not privilege. He washed the feet of prisoners, embraced individuals with severe deformities, and made it his mission to speak for those who had been pushed to the margins of society: the poor, the refugee, the overlooked, and the forgotten. In what would become his last official message to the world, Pope Francis continued this theme of selfless concern for others. He called upon world leaders to protect fundamental freedoms, religious, intellectual, and personal, and implored them to seek lasting peace where conflict still reigned. His voice, though conveyed through another, carried the same passion and fire it always had. He reminded the global community of the responsibility to aid those facing starvation, to uphold human dignity, and to never lose sight of the fragile hope that binds all people together. Historically, the initial confirmation of a pope's passing involves the Camerlengo, a senior Vatican official tasked with verifying the death. In a scene both sacred and symbolic, the Camerlengo approaches the pope and calls out his baptismal name 3 times. If there is no reply, tradition holds that the pope has truly departed from this world, and the official then announces it to the church. What follows is the ceremonial destruction of the fisherman's ring, a distinctive symbol of papal authority. The ring is crushed, marking the official end of the pope's ability to govern the church, preventing its misuse, and signaling the closure of his earthly mission. The rituals that ensue usually unfold with stately grandeur. Within 24 hours, the late pope's body is customarily embalmed and placed on a raised structure known as a catafalque inside the Grand St. Peter's Basilica. Here, thousands of faithful are given the opportunity to pass by, pray, and pay their final respects. In burial, 3 nested coffins are used. First, one of cypress wood to reflect simplicity, then a lead coffin representing durability and finality, and lastly, an outer oak coffin symbolizing the dignity of the Church and the Pope's enduring legacy. These layers are not merely practical, but speak to the sacredness of the position held by the Holy Father. But in characteristic fashion, Pope Francis reimagined these long-standing customs to better reflect the principles he held close throughout his life. He had already approved simpler funeral plans well before his death. Instead of the triple coffin tradition, he requested a single wooden casket lined with zinc, modest yet dignified. Furthermore, he declined to have his body displayed in the traditional manner upon the catafalque. Rather than being set out for public viewing, he preferred a more intimate setting, asking instead to remain within his coffin, with the lid open for visitors to quietly offer their prayers and farewells. Perhaps the most striking departure from centuries of precedent was his final resting place. For over 100 years, popes have been interred within the crypt of St. Peter's Basilica, the Vatican Grotto, surrounded by the remains of past pontiffs beneath the heart of Catholicism. But Pope Francis chose a different destination. He expressed his desire to be buried at the Basilica of St. Mary Major, one of the 4 major basilicas of Rome and a church he held close to his heart. This decision spoke volumes. It was more than personal preference. It was a theological and pastoral statement. His burial site, located in a more accessible part of the city, will be open to ordinary people. It reflects his lifelong emphasis on being a pope among the people, even in death. St. Mary Major, located in the very heart of Rome, is a place where pilgrims, tourists, and locals alike can stop to offer a prayer or light a candle. Unlike the more secluded grotto of the Vatican, this basilica stands among the people, among the living streets of the eternal city. In choosing this sacred space, Pope Francis ensured that his memory would remain close to those he loved the most: the forgotten, the overlooked, the poor, and those seeking hope. As word of his passing traveled across continents, The outpouring of tributes and reflections was immediate and profound. Leaders from all corners of the globe, regardless of religious or political affiliations, paused to remember the impact of this extraordinary man. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, spoke of how Pope Francis had moved millions beyond the boundaries of any single faith tradition with his compassion, simplicity, and deep concern for the least among us. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni called him a personal friend and recalled how he had often called upon humanity to summon the strength needed to change its course, urging all of us to choose kindness over division, peace over conflict. In the United States, Vice President J.D. Vance expressed heartfelt condolences, recalling his recent meeting with the Pope just hours before his death. He spoke of the millions of Christians now mourning a spiritual father they deeply admired. From across the Atlantic, Archbishop Stephen Cottrell of York offered a deeply human remembrance, describing Francis not only as a holy servant of God, but also as someone vibrant and full of life, funny, genuine, and refreshingly approachable. But the man who will follow Francis will inherit a task unlike any other. He will step into the shoes of a pope who redefined the modern papacy, who opened the windows of the church to let in fresh air, who spoke not only to cardinals and clergy, but to prisoners, migrants, and children alike. Pope Francis's passing did not merely mark the end of an era. It closed a chapter of transformation and courage. His death, occurring during the sacred season of Easter and in the year of Jubilee, a time when countless pilgrims flood Rome in search of reconciliation and mercy, only deepens the emotional weight of this moment. Francis once famously said that he came from the ends of the earth, and indeed his journey to the papacy and beyond was anything but conventional. He challenged norms, stirred conversations, and brought the teachings of Christ to those far from the pews. His legacy is not one of marble statues or golden thrones. It is a legacy written on the hearts of those he touched. As the bells of St. Peter's toll in solemn rhythm and people around the globe light candles in his honor, the memory of Pope Francis will endure not simply as a pope, but as a servant who called the church to build bridges, not walls, to go out into the streets, and to never forget those who live at the margins of society. For a man who intentionally adopted the name Francis, inspired by St. Francis of Assisi, the humble friar who gave up wealth to live among the poor, it is only fitting that his final journey echoes that same spirit of simplicity, compassion, and profound humility. In life, Pope Francis became a beacon of mercy and a voice for those forgotten by the world. And in death, he continues to offer lessons not through grand pronouncements, but through the quiet dignity with which he approached his final chapter. His decision to strip away centuries of elaborate customs in favor of modesty and accessibility reminds us that the true heart of faith lies not in pageantry, but in service, in compassion, and in being present for others. And yet, the question that now quietly stirs within the hearts of many is both simple and profound. Who will step forward to carry the torch Francis held aloft? Will the next pope embrace his vision of a church that walks with the suffering, speaks for the voiceless, and confronts the crises of modern times with courage and love? Or will the next chapter bring a return to older ways, rebalancing tradition and reform in a new and unexpected way? In an age marked by constant change, social, political, technological, the role of the Church remains both anchor and compass for countless souls. The new pontiff will not only inherit the keys of St. Peter, but the expectations, dreams, and prayers of a world still longing for spiritual guidance and unity. We will continue to follow every moment of this historic unfolding with thoughtful and respectful coverage, from the final rites of Pope Francis's funeral to the ancient and secretive rituals of the conclave. This is not simply an event for the Catholic faithful. It is a turning point that holds implications for communities, cultures, and conversations across the globe. The legacy of Pope Francis has already stretched far beyond the boundaries of Rome, reaching into villages, cities, and hearts in every corner of the world. His successor will inherit not just the throne of St. Peter, but the mantle of a transformative figure who changed the papacy forever. If you found this in-depth look into the customs, reflections, and future of the Church meaningful, we invite you to stay with us during this time of sacred transition. By subscribing now, you'll receive immediate updates as this story unfolds, from the ceremonial processions to the quiet deliberations inside Vatican walls. Your support through likes, thoughtful comments, and shares helps us bring these important stories to more people and keeps the conversation alive around themes that truly matter: faith, hope, and the human spirit. For those who wish to explore these topics even further, we offer something special. Our channel members receive access to deeper insights, including exclusive interviews with respected Vatican scholars and church historians, in-depth examinations of past papal elections, and real-time updates from our dedicated team reporting directly from Rome. It's a way to be not just a viewer, but a part of this moment in history. As the Church mourns the loss of a beloved shepherd and prepares for the dawn of a new pontificate, let us hold close the words Pope Francis lived by: that to be Christian is to build bridges, not walls, to walk with the poor, comfort the broken, and love without limit. His voice may now be silent, but his message echoes still, calling us toward a world that listens, heals, and dares to hope. Rome itself seems transformed in these days. The city breathes differently, its streets filled with murmurs of rosaries, quiet tears, and candlelit vigils. Florists struggle to keep up with the demand for white lilies and red roses, while priests from every continent gather beneath the ancient columns of St. Peter's Basilica. Language is no barrier here. The expressions of grief and reverence are universally understood. And yet, amid the mourning, there is a sense of preparation, of sacred readiness. For just beyond the veil of sorrow lies an event as ancient as the Church itself, the conclave. In the days ahead, the College of Cardinals will engage in intense prayer and deliberation. Each of them carries the weight of the Church's future on their shoulders. Though dressed in red, the color of martyrdom and sacrifice, their responsibility is not political, but spiritual. The conclave is more than an election. It is a search for a soul chosen not by popularity or charisma, but by discernment, humility, and spiritual vision. As they enter the Sistine Chapel, they pass beneath Michelangelo's great fresco of the Last Judgment, an image that reminds them, as it has reminded generations before, of the divine gaze under which they cast their vote. Outside those frescoed walls, the world waits. Many wonder if the next pontiff will continue the pastoral reforms initiated by Pope Francis. His embrace of dialogue, his outreach to the peripheries, his emphasis on ecological stewardship and economic justice. Others hope for a figure who will restore older traditions, safeguard doctrine, and uphold the continuity of centuries past. The tension between innovation and tradition is not new. It has shaped the Church since its earliest days. Yet what makes this moment distinct is the global scale of expectation. Never before has the Catholic Church been so universally visible, so deeply intertwined with the cultural, moral, and humanitarian challenges of our times. Beyond the Vatican walls, countless believers are offering novenas, lighting candles, and kneeling in silence, asking God to guide the Cardinal's choice. From the slums of Manila to the cathedrals of Paris, from the favelas of Brazil to quiet chapels in rural Poland, the Catholic world is united in prayer. And alongside the faithful, stand many others, non-Catholics, secular observers, and journalists, who recognize the significance of this transition not only as a religious event, but as a moment of global consequence. The next pope will be not only a shepherd to the church, but a moral voice in a fractured world, a spiritual anchor in times of uncertainty. The legacy of Pope Francis hangs quietly in the air as the cardinals begin their sacred task. His papacy was not marked by sweeping institutional changes, but by a shift in tone and emphasis on mercy over judgment, presence over prestige. He challenged Catholics to see Christ in the face of the refugee, the prisoner, the child, and the stranger. He visited conflict zones, embraced the sick and disfigured, and broke bread with the homeless. His was a papacy of gestures that spoke louder than decrees, a church of accompaniment rather than authority. For many, his legacy will not be measured in policies, but in the spirit he awakened. As such, whoever follows him will not merely be compared to the theologians or administrators of the past. He will be compared to a man who lived as if the gospel were a daily truth, not a distant theory. A man who insisted the church should smell like the sheep it shepherds. A man who reminded the world that faith without compassion is an empty echo. What lies ahead is uncertain. Will the new pope come from Africa, where the church is growing rapidly in both numbers and fervor, or will he emerge from Asia, where interfaith dialogue and religious persecution intertwine? Could he hail from Latin America once again, or will Europe's voice rise once more in the heart of the church? These questions stir conversation, but they also point to a deeper truth. The church is no longer Eurocentric. It is global, vibrant, and alive in ways that statistics cannot fully capture. The conclave, though ancient, is not archaic. It is a process soaked in prayer, mystery, and trust. The doors of the Sistine Chapel will close, and the outside world will wait in silence for the smoke to rise. Black smoke will signal that no consensus has been reached. White smoke will signal that history has changed again, that the church has spoken, and a new shepherd has accepted the call. Until then, the faithful remain in vigil, not just in the plazas of Rome, but in homes and hearts across the world. People are watching, waiting, and whispering prayers into the quiet corners of their lives. Some are nervous, others hopeful, but all are aware that this moment matters not just for doctrine or dogma, but for the soul of the church and the moral imagination of the modern world. The funeral of Pope Francis, when it arrives, will not be a spectacle of wealth or hierarchy. It will be a liturgy of love, a final act of a man who spent his life preaching that greatness lies in humility. There will be weeping, yes, but there will also be gratitude for a life given without hesitation, for a heart that embraced the world wounds, and for a legacy that calls us all to live more simply, more bravely, more faithfully. The story of Pope Francis does not end with his burial. It continues in the choices we make, the compassion we extend, and the bridges we build in his memory. Whether one is Catholic or not, believer or seeker, this moment invites us all to ask what kind of world we wish to build and who will have the courage to lead us there. As the world stands at the threshold of a new papacy, there is a collective breath being held, a moment of stillness before the next chapter begins. But in this pause, something extraordinary is unfolding. People are not just watching, they are reflecting. The death of Pope Francis has stirred a rare kind of global introspection, one that reaches far beyond liturgical rites and ecclesiastical tradition. His passing during the sacred days of Easter, the very season of resurrection, has become a mirror through which the world is re-evaluating not only the future of the Catholic Church, but the moral direction of humanity itself. The late pontiff's influence did not remain confined to cathedrals or Vatican halls. His presence echoed in refugee camps, in the speeches of world leaders, in environmental movements, and even the quiet prayers of the lonely and forgotten. In many ways, Pope Francis was not merely the Bishop of Rome. He became a spiritual conscience for a generation grappling with division, suffering, and uncertainty. His leadership reminded the world that compassion is not weakness, that humility is not silence, and that power wielded with love can change not only institutions but hearts. All of this now flows into the mystery of what comes next. The death of a pope does not erase his legacy. It crystallizes it, offering it as a foundation upon which new ideas, new challenges, and new leaders must now build. And so, as the College of Cardinals prepares to cast their ballots in solemn silence, their decision carries an invisible weight, not only choosing a successor to Pope Francis, but also interpreting his vision, deciding whether to carry it forward, refine it, or recalibrate the course altogether. What many observers overlook is how deeply spiritual the process truly is. These cardinals are not politicians gathered in a parliament. They are servants of the church entering a sacred space with the heavy knowledge that they are part of a decision guided not by strategy, but by the Holy Spirit. They carry with them the voices of the faithful, the silent cries of the persecuted, the whispered prayers of elderly women clutching rosaries, and the dreams of young Catholics hoping the Church continues to walk beside them in a complex world. Whoever succeeds him will face an enormous task. It will not be enough to simply wear the white cassock and wave from the balcony. The world will expect more, not perfection, but presence, not rigid answers, but courageous engagement. The next pope will need to continue navigating the tensions between tradition and innovation, unity and diversity, doctrine and dialogue. He will have to speak to the soul of the church while also understanding the heartbeat of the world. As we await this decision, the church is not idle. In parishes around the globe, masses are offered in memory of Pope Francis. Candles burn near statues of the Virgin Mary. Children ask their parents what it means to have no pope. And in quiet monasteries, monks and nuns pray that the next shepherd will continue the work of peace, reconciliation, and justice. Pope Francis once said, "A shepherd should have the smell of his sheep." That one phrase may capture his entire papacy more than any document or encyclical. He was close to people, close enough to see their pain, hear their questions, and walk with them in uncertainty. He reminded the world that holiness is not about separation, but about service. That the church is not a fortress, but a field hospital. And that being Catholic is not about appearances, but about love and action. The church waits. The world waits, not for smoke, but for guidance. Not just for a new pope, but for a renewed sense of mission. Whatever happens in the days ahead, one truth remains. Pope Francis has already changed the church, and the church through him has already changed the world. The final funeral rites will unfold with quiet reverence. Incense will rise through the golden light, filtering into St. Peter's Basilica, curling heavenward like the prayers of millions across the globe. The casket of simple wood, chosen by Francis himself, will be carried by men with solemn steps, not to be entombed in the deep heart of Vatican stone, but instead to be laid among the people in a basilica open to the world. No gilded sarcophagus, no royal crypt, just a man of God resting beneath a ceiling painted with the history of salvation, where anyone may come and kneel, weep, whisper thanks, or simply sit in the presence of silence. As the church buries its shepherd, it does not bury his legacy. The seeds he planted are not buried. They are sown. They remain in the hearts of those who heard him speak, who saw him embrace the outcast, who watched him wash the feet of prisoners, and who recognized something startlingly real in the tired man smiling from a wheelchair on Easter morning. Those seeds now sprout quietly in parishes and slums, in the hearts of children learning mercy, in the minds of leaders who have not forgotten what it means to serve rather than to rule. In a way, Pope Francis taught the world to see holiness in imperfection. He did not present himself as unshakable or untouchable. He shared his doubts, showed his age, and even admitted his fears. Yet it was in that transparency that his strength was revealed. For faith, he reminded us, is not about having all the answers. It is about walking forward step by trembling step, even when the path is unclear. In a world hungry for authenticity, his vulnerability became his greatest power. Now, with his death, we are left with a question, not of succession, but of spirit. Not who will wear the white robes, but what will we carry forward? Will the church continue his call to radical mercy? Will it remain a hospital for souls, a refuge for the rejected, a light for those in despair? Or will it grow cautious, seeking comfort in rigidity rather than risking love? These are not questions for the cardinals alone. They are questions for every believer, for every person who heard Francis say, "Who am I to judge?" and felt something stir within. And perhaps that is the true measure of a life well lived. Not the number of titles held or the grandeur of one's funeral, but the echoes that remain long after the last words have been spoken. In hospital rooms where nurses recall how he championed care for the vulnerable. In classrooms where teachers inspire students with stories of his advocacy for the environment. In confessionals where priests remember his insistence that no soul is beyond redemption. In slums and shelters where the poor still feel seen because he once visited, listened, and stayed. The conclave will end. A new pope will emerge. The white smoke will rise into the Roman sky, and the cheers in St. Peter's Square will announce the new name has been chosen. That moment will be filled with hope, speculation, and the trembling awe of tradition. But long after the excitement fades, the Church will still be left with the task Francis laid before it, to live the gospel not as an idea, but as a heartbeat, to be a church that walks beside the people, not above them. In his final years, Pope Francis spoke often of joy, not superficial happiness, but the joy that springs from surrender, from selflessness, from love that expects nothing in return. The joy of the gospel fills the hearts and lives of all who encounter Jesus, he once wrote. That joy, simple, luminous, unshakable, is what he leaves behind. It is a legacy that cannot be measured in statistics or monuments. It is a legacy written in the small, sacred acts of kindness that ripple outward across generations. As the sun sets on this chapter, the Catholic Church remains as it always has, ancient and ever new. A church of contradiction and beauty, of suffering and hope, of unchanging truth and ever-evolving expression. And through the corridors of time, the name of Francis will remain not as a saint of marble or a relic of history, but as a living reminder that to be great is to be small, that to lead is to kneel, and that to love is to give everything, even your breath, for the sake of another. The bells of Rome will ring again. The crowds will thin. The cameras will move on, but in hearts all over the world, the echo of this papacy will endure. And perhaps in moments of quiet, we will still hear that gentle voice reminding us to build bridges, not walls, to remember the poor, to protect the earth, to forgive often, and to walk with God even when the path is difficult. Farewell, Holy Father. May eternal light shine upon you, and may the work you began in faith and in love continue through us.